Wyoming Territory. Autumn of 1877, the wind howled across the high plains like it was mourning something lost. And in the town of Willow Creek, not much stirred after dark. But that night, light flickered behind the warped glass windows of the old clapboard church at the edge of town. Inside, on a rough bench near the altar, a young woman sat curled with a baby in her arms. Her coat was thin, her hair damp from the rain, and her boots were caked in mud. She held the baby to her chest like the world might take him if she loosened her grip for a second. The boy was tiny, swaddled in a threadbare blanket, his cheeks flushed from the cold. The woman's name was Adeline Novak. She was 22, and she had not slept in 2 days. The heavy church doors creaked open. The wind pushed in behind a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a worn hat pulled low and a rifle slung over his back. His boots were solid, his coat thick, and the moment he stepped into the candlelight, his eyes locked on Adeline. He did not reach for his rifle. He did not speak right away either. He just looked at her, at the baby she clutched and the fear in her eyes. "I ain't here to scare you," he said after a moment, voice low and calm. "Name's Prescott Walker. I saw the light. Figured no one be in here this late unless they had nowhere else to go." Adeline did not answer. She just pulled the baby closer, her arms trembling. Prescott took off his hat, stepped forward slow. "You got a name?" her voice cracked. "Adeline," he nodded. "That your boy?" She hesitated. "Yes." Prescott looked around the church. There was no fire, no food, no sign of anything except the small candle beside her and the mud she had tracked in. "You cannot stay here," he said gently. "It gets colder by the hour. That child needs warmth, and so do you." "I do not have anywhere else," she whispered. Prescott paused, then knelt down a few feet from her. "You are not alone tonight." She stared at him. Her face was pale, lips chapped, but something shifted in her eyes. Not trust, not yet. But something quieter. Hope, maybe. Prescott stood again. "I got a cabin half a mile outside town. It is warm, there is food, you do not have to stay long, just long enough to catch your breath." Adeline swallowed hard. "Why would you help me?" He met her gaze. "Because someone should have helped my sister when she needed it. No one did." The church was silent except for the wind outside. Then, slowly, Adeline stood. She staggered a little, and Prescott stepped in without hesitation, steadying her with one hand. She let him. The baby stirred and whimpered. Prescott saw the way Adeline kissed his forehead, murmuring something soft. They walked together through the cold, her steps unsteady, his steady as stone. When they reached the cabin, he pushed open the door and let the warmth of the fire inside wrap around them. Adeline sat near the hearth while Prescott fetched dry blankets and boiled water. He did not ask questions right away. She looked like she had not been treated gentle in a long time, and he was not about to press her. She fed the baby in silence, her eyes never leaving his face. It was clear she had done everything to keep him safe, even if it meant sleeping in a cold church with nothing but a splintered bench beneath her. Later, after the baby was tucked in a basket near the fire and the wind had died down, she finally spoke. "His name is Nolan." Prescott looked up from where he was setting a kettle on the hook. "That is a strong name." Adeline nodded, her hands resting in her lap. "He is all I have." Prescott stirred the fire. "And you are all he has." "Seems like the two of you are stronger than most." She watched him, her expression unreadable. "Do you live out here alone?" He nodded. "Have for a few years. Used to drive cattle. Now I mostly fix fences and trade pelts to the general store." "And your sister," he paused. "Died after her husband left her with 2 babies. She got sick. No one helped, the boys. They got taken in by folks out east." Adeline lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." He looked at her, his voice quieter now. "I was too late for her. But maybe I am not too late for you." The silence between them was heavy but not cold. That night, Adeline curled on a cot Prescott set up near the fire. Nolan slept in his basket. Prescott stayed in the chair by the door, rifle within reach, boots still on. He did not sleep much. Instead, he watched the firelight dance across her face and the baby's chest rise and fall. He did not understand why it mattered so much, but it did. She mattered. By morning, the snow had started to fall. Prescott cooked breakfast and Adeline ate like someone who had not had a warm meal in weeks. She did not say much, but her eyes were clearer. "Do you have a plan?" he asked. She shook her head. "I had family in Kansas, but when I got there, they were gone, moved on. I did not know where else to go," he nodded slowly. "Well, you are here now," she looked up. "You still want me to leave?" Prescott met her eyes. No, something passed between them then, not a promise, not yet, but something real. He stood and lifted his coat from the peg. "I have to check the traps. You stay here, rest, use anything you need." When he opened the door, the snow was falling steady. He looked back at her, the baby in her lap, her eyes watching him. "I will be back before dark," he said. She nodded. "Prescott," he turned. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "You are not alone, Adeline. Not anymore." And then he stepped out into the snow. The snow deepened as the morning wore on, muffling sound and softening the frozen edges of the world outside. Inside the cabin, the walls held the heat well, and for the first time in days, Adeline felt the ache in her shoulders begin to ease. She had not slept deeply, but it had been enough to clear the fog in her head. Nolan stirred in his basket, stretching his tiny arms, his small face scrunching as he yawned. She gathered him carefully, letting the weight of him settle against her as she stood by the window. The forest beyond the yard lay hushed and white. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the sky like a ribbon. She traced a fingertip along the frost that had crept onto the glass overnight. In the far distance, movement caught her eye. Prescott, a dark figure against the snow, trudging through the pines with something slung over his shoulder. She watched him for a long while before stepping back. When he returned, his coat was dusted in snow, and a string of rabbits hung from his belt. He stamped the cold from his boots at the threshold, then stepped inside, the scent of pine and damp leather following him. "I set the rest of the traps further up the ridge," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Took longer than I figured." Adeline nodded, adjusting Nolan in her arms. "I saw you coming. From the window." Prescott laid the rabbits on the table and began untying them with quiet efficiency. "You get some rest. Enough." Her voice steadied. "He stayed asleep most of the time." "That's good," he said without looking up. She crossed the room and eased Nolan into the basket again. "Would you like me to help with those?" He paused, then handed her a small knife from the drawer. "If you don't mind skinning, I'd be grateful." They worked side by side in companionable silence, the only sound the soft scrape of blade on hide. She was quick and practiced, and he noticed. "You've done this before," he said. "My brother taught me." He used to trap mink and muskrat near the river back home. Prescott didn't ask where home was. He only nodded. "You've got a sure hand." They finished in good time. Prescott cleaned the knives and Adeline washed her hands in the basin by the door. Her fingers were red from the cold water, and without thinking, he reached into the cupboard and handed her a tin of salve. "Mint oil and bear fat," he said. "Keeps the cracks from bleeding." She took it, rubbing a dab between her palms. "You make it." "My mother did." "I just follow her notes." Adeline looked around. "Did she live here too?" "Not in this cabin, but we were nearby. Before she passed, she wrote down everything she knew: how to treat burns, how to dry herbs, even how to keep weevils out of flour." He set the tin back on the shelf. "I've kept the pages. Can't say I always do it right." "You manage," she said, her tone softening. He looked at her then, and for a moment neither of them moved. Later, while Nolan napped, Prescott brought in more firewood. When he returned, Adeline was sitting on the floor by the hearth, a length of thread in her hand, sewing a tear in her coat. "You're wasting your daylight on me," she said without glancing up. "I've got enough daylight to share," he replied, stacking the wood. She smiled, just barely. "You always like this with strangers." "No," Prescott said simply, "but you don't feel like a stranger." She was quiet for a long time after that. The wind picked up again, rattling the shutters once before dying down. The fire hissed softly, and Nolan let out a short cry before settling again. "I was supposed to marry," Adeline said finally. "Last year. He was a carpenter. His name was Emery. We had plans, a parcel of land, a house with a root cellar. But then the fever came through Wichita, took him in 3 days. Prescott didn't speak. "I didn't know about Nolan then," she continued. "Didn't find out until after. By the time he was born, I was staying with an old woman who let me work for bread and a place in her barn. But she died too, and after that, I just kept moving." Prescott sat down beside the hearth, his back to the wall. "You don't have to keep moving now," her eyes met his. "I don't expect you to carry what isn't yours." "I'm not carrying anything," he said. "I'm offering a place. If it helps you breathe easier, that's enough." Outside, the snow kept falling in slow, steady flakes. Inside, the warmth settled into the corners. "Did you always live this far from town?" she asked, changing the subject. "After the war, I needed quiet. This place gave it." She didn't ask which side he'd fought on. She didn't need to. As dusk crept in, Adeline lit a new candle, and Prescott ladled stew into 2 tin bowls. They ate at the table, the baby asleep again, their words fewer now but easier. That night, while the wind whispered low against the eaves, Prescott laid a second quilt over the cot. She didn't need to ask where it came from. Before blowing out the lantern, Adeline glanced toward the door, then at him, seated again in the chair beside it. "You don't always have to stay up," she said. "I know," he said. "But I will." She didn't argue. And as the fire dimmed and the room fell quiet, something different settled between them, not obligation, not pity, but something waiting to grow if given time. The days folded into one another, quiet and unhurried beneath a pale winter sun. The snow no longer fell, but it lingered, blanketing the ground in a hush that settled deep into the bones of the land. Adeline used the time to repair what little she owned. The seams in her dress, the frayed hem of a blanket, the loose stitch on Nolan's wrap, all of it was tended with methodical care. She did not ask for more than what was offered, nor did she speak of what might come next. Prescott didn't press her. He simply made room. One morning, she found him mending a broken hinge on the shed door, sleeves rolled to the elbow, sawdust clinging to the edge of his collar. She stood in the threshold, Nolan dozing against her shoulder. "You've done carpenter work before," she said. Prescott glanced at her, then back to the board he was fitting. "My father ran a sawmill outside of Cody, taught me when I was tall enough to hold the square. Emery used to say wood tells you what it wants to be if you listen close." Prescott didn't look up. "He sounded like a good man." "He was steady," she said. "Not one for big words, but he built things that didn't fall apart." Prescott tightened the hinge and straightened. "What about you? What did you want before?" "I wanted a kitchen with a window, chickens. A place where I didn't have to look over my shoulder." He ran a thumb along the edge of the new plank. "That's still possible." Adeline shifted Nolan's weight and leaned against the frame. "You sound sure." "I've seen what can come back from ruin," he said. "My hand's not on a Bible, but I mean it." Later, while she boiled water for washing, Prescott returned from town with a sack of oats and a wrapped bundle of wool. "I traded 2 pelts for this," he said, setting it beside the hearth. "It's not much, but it'll keep him warmer at night. Adeline unfolded the wool, fingers running across the weave. You didn't have to. I know, he said, setting his gloves by the fire. She folded the cloth slowly. You ever think about leaving this place? Sometimes, he said. But quiet's hard to find, and I don't like crowds much. I don't either, she said. I used to think I did, but I don't. Prescott leaned back in the chair, eyes on the low, burning coals. You plan to send word to anyone, she shook her head. There's no one left to write. He didn't ask more. Instead, he pulled a tin from the hearth's edge and poured 2 cups of strong coffee. She took one and sat across from him, holding the warmth between her palms. You ever think about starting over? She asked. Every day, he said. Then maybe we're not so different. That night, Nolan wouldn't settle. Adeline walked the floor slowly, humming a tune under her breath. Prescott lit a second lamp and returned to carving at a piece of pine, shaping it into something small and rounded. What are you making? She asked as she passed. A rattle, he said. Figured he might like something to hold on to. She stopped, watching his hands move with practiced ease. You're good at that. I've had time to learn. He'll like it, she said. He likes the sound of spoons, too. Prescott looked up. I can carve one with beads inside. You don't have to do all that. I want to, he said plainly. She held his gaze longer than usual. You keep doing that, saying things that make me forget how alone I've been. You're not, he said. Not anymore. She didn't answer right away, just rocked Nolan gently in her arms. The child's eyelids fluttered, then settled. When she turned toward the cot, she paused. Prescott, he raised his eyes. I don't know what this place is yet, or what comes next. But I sleep easier here than I have in a long time. He stood slowly, setting the carving on the table. Then we'll figure it out one day at a time, she nodded. One day at a time. When the lamp was blown out and the fire banked low, Prescott stayed by the door again, but this time Adeline didn't question it. And when sleep came, it came like something earned. Something safe. A thaw had begun, slow and tentative, as February gave way to March. The snow no longer held its grip by midday, and water ran in narrow rivulets down the side of the hill behind the cabin. The ground, still hard in spots, had started to loosen, and with it came the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Prescott built a new pen behind the shed, hammering posts into the softening soil with the long-handled maul he'd fetched from the barn. He worked shirt-sleeved, the sun warming his back, and glanced toward the house where Adeline stood in the open doorway with Nolan balanced on her hip. The child had grown heavier, his neck stronger. He squinted at the light and grabbed at a loose thread on his mother's shawl. You reckon chickens will stay put in a pen this size? Prescott called, shouldering another post. Adeline stepped into the yard, shielding her eyes with one hand. If they've got feed and shelter, they'll stay, but you'll want a rail across the middle. Hawks will come once the snow's gone. He drove the post in deeper. You've kept them before. My aunt raised hens back in Missouri. We'd help gather eggs before school. There was a red one that followed me everywhere, used to peck at my boots until I fed her corn. Prescott drew a line in the dirt with the heel of his boot. I can get lumber from town next time I go. Build a coop with a sloped roof, maybe a side hatch. Adeline rocked Nolan gently as he began to fuss. You planning to trade for birds too? Already spoke with Mr. Hanley. He's got a few near laying. Said he'd take pelts and a bit of kindling in trade. She adjusted the baby's wrap. You're not just building a pen. Prescott leaned on the mallet. You're not just passing through. She lowered her eyes, then met his again. I want to do more than take up space here. You already do more than that. I mean real work, not just sewing and stirring pots. I can help plant, mend tack, whatever's needed. You'll get no argument from me, he said. Back inside, Adeline folded the cloth diapers she'd washed early that morning, hands moving with quiet rhythm. Prescott sat with Nolan by the hearth, letting the boy grip his broad fingers. The child gurgled, then laughed a new sound, and Prescott's mouth twitched in surprise. "He's never done that before," Adeline said, pausing in her folding. Prescott looked up. "He's got a strong voice. He likes you." He stood and handed Nolan back to her. "I'm not used to small hands grabbing hold like that. They do that when they feel safe." Later, while Prescott dug out the last of the root vegetables from the cellar, Adeline sorted through the bundle he'd brought back from town 2 days earlier: a second-hand bonnet, some coarsely woven cloth, and a small bag of dried yarrow. She tucked the herb into a tin on the shelf and fingered the edge of the bonnet. "I haven't worn one since Kansas," she said when he came back in. Prescott dusted the dirt from his trousers. "It's yours if you want it. I might. For Sunday." He raised a brow. "Thinking of going back to the church. Not for the sermon," she said. "But I'd like Nolan to hear music. There's a girl who plays fiddle there. I remember the sound." Prescott nodded. "We can go together. I'll hitch the wagon." They didn't speak much that evening. After supper, she sat by the window, darning a hole in one of his socks. Prescott watched the fire, sharpening his knife with long, even strokes. Nolan slept in the basket wrapped in the wool Prescott had traded for, his breath steady. As the sky faded to ink, she set the sock aside. "Prescott," he looked over, "when you found me that night, I didn't think I'd ever stop running. You've stopped now. I don't want to leave. You don't have to." She walked to the hearth, her fingers brushing the edge of the mantel. "I've been trying to say something, but I don't know the right shape for it." "You don't have to say it," he said, rising. "I want to," she said, "because I feel it." Prescott stepped close, his hand finding hers with quiet certainty. "Me too." She didn't pull away. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen, of being wanted without demand. He touched her cheek, rough palm against soft skin, and she leaned into it. "Stay with me," he said. "I already am." He kissed her then, slow and sure, the kind that settled deep and didn't ask for anything more than the moment. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her like he'd been waiting for that shape to fit into his life. Outside, the moon climbed higher, and the last of the snow began to melt from the eaves. Inside, without speaking again, they stood quiet and close, the fire casting their shadows long across the floorboards. They didn't need to speak of love. It was already there, alive in the stillness between their breaths, in the way their hands had found each other and held fast. The Sunday morning Adeline had spoken of came with clear skies and a light breeze that carried the scent of wet pine and thawing bark. The wagon Prescott had hitched stood waiting with a folded quilt across the seat and a small basket tucked beneath it. Nolan was bundled and fed, his eyes wide as he blinked into the morning sun. Adeline wore the bonnet he'd brought, tied low beneath her chin. She didn't fuss with it, didn't ask how she looked. That part of her had gone quiet long ago, replaced by steadier things. Prescott helped her up first, then lifted Nolan into her arms before taking the reins. The road into town had softened with the melt, but it held firm enough under the wagon's weight. They passed the same trees Prescott had walked through that night months back, only now their limbs were bare instead of snow-laden, and the path ahead no longer felt uncertain. They reached Willow Creek, just as the bell rang out over the rooftops. It wasn't a full congregation, folks came and went with the seasons, but the sound of music inside the church floated out through the open doors. A fiddle, as Adeline had remembered, joined by a man's voice singing low and slow. Inside, they sat near the back, Nolan asleep against her shoulder. No one stared, no one whispered. The town had seen worse than a woman with a child and a man beside her who looked like he belonged there. After the service, a woman with a lined face and a dark shawl approached them outside, carrying a jar of pickled onions and a soft, cautious smile. "Prescott, heard you took someone in," she said, glancing at Adeline. "Didn't know she'd be so pretty." Adeline didn't flinch. She waited. "This is Mrs. Keene," Prescott said. "She keeps the store ledger." Mrs. Keene extended the jar. "For your table. And if you ever need thread or a needle that won't break halfway through a hem, come by. I've got more than I'll use." Adeline accepted it. "Thank you. She's kind when she wants to be," Prescott said once they were alone again. "She doesn't scare me," Adeline said. "I've met worse with softer voices. They stayed in town just long enough to buy a sack of flour and a tin of molasses." On the way back, Adeline sat closer against him on the wagon seat, not for warmth but for the ease of it. Her hand rested near his on the reins, and when he glanced over, she met his eyes without looking away. That evening, Prescott laid the flour on the shelf and set the molasses beside the coffee tin. Adeline unwrapped the cloth she'd packed and pulled out a round tin of lard she hadn't mentioned before. "I've been saving it," she said. "Thought maybe today we could make something sweet." They worked side by side at the table, measuring without measuring, using the heel of her palm to flatten the dough and the back of a spoon to spread the molasses. Nolan gurgled from his basket, batting at the corner of a quilt Prescott's mother had pieced before the war. When the biscuits came out of the firebox, they cracked and steamed and filled the room with a smell that stuck to the beams. Prescott took one, broke it open, and passed half to her. The other half he offered to Nolan, who grabbed at it with both hands and immediately dropped it. "He's got your grip," Prescott said. "He's got your appetite," she answered, smiling. As dusk settled, they moved without speaking into the rhythm they'd built slowly, piece by piece. She swept the floor. He brought in the last of the firewood. Nolan drifted off early when the chores were done. They stood by the open door and watched the sky darken. The stars above were sharp and silver. The wind had stilled. "I need to ask you something," Prescott said, voice quiet. She waited. "I built this place for quiet, but it's better now with your voice in it, with his too." Adeline didn't speak. "I don't want you to feel like you have to earn your place here. You already have. I want it to be ours if you'll let it." She turned to him, her face clear in the moonlight. "I don't want to leave. I want to wake up here, plant things, raise him where the ground's steady." Prescott stepped forward, took her hands in his. "Then stay. Stay in every way that matters." She nodded, slow and sure. "I will." He kissed her again, deeper this time, not as a question but as a beginning. Her hands pulled him close, and in the quiet that followed, no promise needed to be spoken aloud. The days that followed were filled with simple things. Prescott built the chicken coop with her help, and 6 hens arrived one morning in a crate that clucked and rattled all the way up the hill. Adeline started a small patch of herb seedlings near the south window. Nolan took to crawling, hands firm against the wooden floor, chasing shadows with determined grunts. Every evening they sat together on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder, his hand resting on her knee. They watched the light fade from the hills, listened to the wind moving through the trees, and let the silence stretch comfortably between them. By midsummer, the garden had taken root, the chickens laid regular, and Nolan had learned to stand with one hand braced against the edge of the table. Adeline hung laundry in the sun while Prescott carved a cradle with careful hands. It rocked steady, didn't creak, and fit beside their bed. She never asked for a ring. He never asked for more than her word. But when they stood together in front of the same church where she'd first heard music again, Reverend Tyner said the words plain and true. Adeline wore a dress she'd stitched herself, simple and blue. Prescott wore his best shirt, the one without the mended sleeve. Nolan, fidgeting in misses. Keen's lap let out a loud coo that scattered a few birds from the eaves. They didn't invite many, just those who'd shown kindness. Afterward, they returned to the cabin with only the sound of wagon wheels and the rustle of leaves to mark the day. That night, they laid Nolan in the new cradle and climbed beneath the quilt that had once covered only one. The fire burned low, and the wind outside spoke of summer coming on. Adeline traced the lines of Prescott's hand where it rested against her stomach. This life, it feels borrowed. Like it should have belonged to someone else. It's ours, he said. No one else could have built it like we did. She kissed him, slow and certain. I love you. I know, he said. I've known since the first time you didn't look away. They fell asleep like that, her breath tucked beneath his jaw, his arm wrapped around her waist, their son safe between the warmth of walls that held no ghosts. Years passed. The garden widened, the chickens multiplied, and Nolan grew into a boy who ran through the trees with a slingshot and a head full of questions. Prescott taught him how to set a line and read tracks. Adeline taught him to listen before speaking and to mind the way the sky changed before a storm. The cabin weathered, but it held. So did the love that lived inside it, and when the wind came through the pines at night, it no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like peace.